The dust swirled through the streets of Cedar Ridge like a living thing, coating everything in a fine layer of brown grit that never seemed to settle. Sarah May wiped down the wooden tables of the Silver Dollar Saloon for the third time that morning, her calloused hands moving in practiced circles across the weathered surface. At 19, she had been working in the saloon for nearly 2 years, ever since her father's death had left her with nothing but debts and a reputation she never asked for. The morning light filtered through the grimy windows, casting long shadows across the empty barroom. In a few hours, the place would be filled with cowboys, miners, and drifters, all looking to wash away the dust and disappointment of another hard day with whiskey and whatever comfort they could find. But for now, in these quiet moments before the storm, Sarah May allowed herself to dream of something different. She had never wanted this life. Before her father's gambling debts had consumed everything they owned, she had dreamed of becoming a schoolteacher. She could read and write better than most folks in town, and she had a gentle way with children that made them want to learn. But dreams were luxuries that poor folks couldn't afford, and when old Pete Carmichael had offered her a job serving drinks and cleaning tables, she had taken it without hesitation. The Silver Dollar wasn't the worst saloon in Cedar Ridge, but it wasn't the best either. Pete ran a relatively clean establishment, and he had made it clear from the beginning that Sarah May was there to serve drinks and nothing else. The painted ladies who worked the upstairs rooms were a different matter entirely, and Pete made sure everyone understood the distinction. Still, that didn't stop some of the rougher customers from getting ideas, especially after they'd been drinking. Sarah May had learned to handle herself over the past 2 years. She could dodge grabbing hands, deflect crude comments with a forced smile, and when necessary, she knew how to swing a bottle hard enough to make a point. But lately, things had been getting worse. A new group of men had been coming around, led by a mean-spirited brute named Jake Bronson, and they seemed to take particular pleasure in making her life difficult. Bronson was a cattle rustler and petty criminal who had somehow managed to avoid getting himself hanged, though not for lack of trying. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders and chest, with small, cruel eyes and hands that were always reaching for things that didn't belong to him. His gang of followers were cut from the same cloth, men who had given up any pretense of honest work in favor of taking what they wanted by force. The trouble had started 3 weeks ago when Bronson had cornered Sarah May near the bar and made his intentions clear. He wanted her to come upstairs with him, and he wasn't interested in hearing the word no. Sarah May had managed to slip away that time, but Bronson had made it clear that his patience was wearing thin. Each night, his comments got cruder, his advances more aggressive, and his threats more explicit. Pete was getting older and wasn't much help when things got rough. He tried to keep order, but he was no match for Bronson and his men, and everyone knew it. The sheriff was either bought off or too scared to intervene, which left Sarah May largely on her own. She had started carrying a small derringer in her apron pocket, though she wasn't sure she would have the courage to use it if the time came. As she continued her morning routine, Sarah May heard the familiar creak of the batwing doors. She looked up, expecting to see one of the early morning regulars looking for coffee and a shot of whiskey to start the day. Instead, she saw a stranger, a tall man in a well-tailored black coat and hat with expensive-looking boots and a gun belt that spoke of quality craftsmanship. The man removed his hat as he entered, revealing dark hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. There was something about him that commanded attention, not just his obvious wealth, but a quiet confidence that suggested he was comfortable in any situation. He moved with the easy grace of someone who had never doubted his place in the world, yet there was nothing arrogant or dismissive in his manner. "Good morning, miss," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent that had been softened by education and travel. "I was wondering if I might trouble you for some coffee and perhaps something to eat?" Sarah May found herself smoothing her apron and pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course, sir. We've got fresh coffee, and I believe Cookie has some biscuits and bacon ready." "That sounds perfect," the man replied, settling himself at a corner table where he could see both the front door and the stairs leading to the upper floor. "I'm new in town, and I was hoping you might be able to tell me a bit about Cedar Ridge." As Sarah May poured his coffee and fetched his breakfast, she found herself stealing glances at the stranger. His clothes were expensive, but not flashy, and his hands were clean, but bore the calluses of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. The gun on his hip was well-maintained and worn with the easy familiarity of a man who knew how to use it. "There's not much to tell, sir," Sarah May said as she set his plate down. "It's a small town, mostly cattle ranchers and miners. Folks mind their own business for the most part." The man smiled, and Sarah May was struck by how it transformed his face. "Call me Thomas, please. Thomas Whitmore. And I have a feeling there's more to Cedar Ridge than meets the eye. There always is in towns like this." Before Sarah May could respond, the batwing doors swung open again, and Jake Bronson swaggered into the saloon. Even at this early hour, he reeked of whiskey and violence, and his small eyes immediately fixed on Sarah May with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Well, Bronson said, his voice slurred but menacing. "If it ain't my favorite little dove. You've been thinking about my offer, sweetheart." Sarah May's hand instinctively moved toward her apron pocket, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Good morning, Mr. Bronson. Can I get you some coffee?" Bronson laughed, a harsh sound that had no humor in it. "Coffee ain't what I'm thirsty for, and you know it." His eyes flicked toward Thomas, taking in the stranger's expensive clothes with obvious resentment. "Who's your friend here?" "Another city boy come to play Cowboy." Thomas continued eating his breakfast, seemingly unbothered by Bronson's aggressive posture. He took a sip of his coffee and then looked up with mild interest, as if he was observing something only moderately amusing. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Thomas said calmly. "Thomas Whitmore." He made no move to stand or offer his hand, which only increased Bronson's irritation. "Jake Bronson," the larger man growled, "and this here's my town. We don't take kindly to strangers who don't know their place." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I see. And what exactly is my place, Mr. Bronson?" The question seemed to catch Bronson off guard. He was used to intimidating people through size and bluster, but Thomas showed no sign of being impressed or frightened. Instead, he seemed genuinely curious about Bronson's answer, which somehow made the situation more unsettling. "Your place," Bronson said, his voice rising, "is to mind your own damn business and stay out of mine." "That seems reasonable," Thomas agreed. "Though I confess, I'm not entirely sure what your business might be. Perhaps you can enlighten me?" Sarah May watched this exchange with growing alarm. She had seen what happened to men who crossed Jake Bronson, and she didn't want this stranger, this Thomas, to get hurt because of her. She started to move forward, hoping to defuse the situation, but Thomas caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. Bronson was getting angrier by the moment. He was used to people cowering when he raised his voice, but Thomas seemed completely unmoved. "My business," Bronson snarled, "is whatever I say it is, including this little filly here." He reached out toward Sarah May, his intention clear. That's when Thomas finally moved. He didn't jump up or make any sudden gestures. Instead, he simply shifted in his chair, and somehow his hand came to rest casually on the butt of his gun. The movement was so smooth and natural that it almost seemed accidental, but there was nothing accidental about the way his eyes had hardened. "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," Thomas said, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge that made even Bronson pause. "Can't let me?" Bronson repeated, incredulous. "Boy, do you have any idea who you're talking to?" "A man who's about to make a serious mistake," Thomas replied. "The young lady is clearly not interested in your attention. Perhaps it would be best if you found somewhere else to drink this morning." Bronson's face was turning red with rage. "You think you can come into my town and tell me what to do? I'll kill you where you sit." Thomas sighed and pushed his plate away, as if the confrontation was spoiling his appetite. "Mr. Bronson, I'm going to explain something to you, and I hope you'll listen carefully. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and my family owns the largest cattle operation in 3 states. We also own the railroad that brings supplies to this town, the bank that holds most of the mortgages, and enough politicians to make your life very uncomfortable. He stood up slowly, and Sarah May was surprised by how tall he was. More importantly, he continued, I've killed 17 men in fair fights, and put down twice that many in situations that weren't quite so fair. Now, you seem like the type of man who responds to direct communication. So let me be very clear. If you lay so much as a finger on this young lady, I will hunt you down and make you wish you had never been born. The saloon had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise of the town seemed to have stopped. Bronson was staring at Thomas with a mixture of rage and uncertainty. He was used to being the most dangerous man in any room, but something about Thomas's calm certainty was deeply unsettling. You're bluffing, Bronson said, but there was less conviction in his voice than before. Thomas smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Am I? Tell me, Mr. Bronson, have you ever heard of the Whitmore Ranch? Perhaps you've heard of the bounty hunters we employ, some of the best in the business, and they have a particular talent for tracking down cattle rustlers. Bronson's face went pale. The Whitmore name was legendary throughout the territory, and their reputation for dealing with thieves and troublemakers was well established. If this man really was who he claimed to be, then Bronson had just threatened someone with the power to destroy him completely. I ain't done nothing to you, Bronson said, his earlier bravado evaporating. Not yet, Thomas agreed, and I sincerely hope you'll keep it that way. But let me make myself perfectly clear, miss. He looked at Sarah May questioningly. Sarah May, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Sarah May is now under my protection, Thomas continued. Anyone who bothers her will answer to me personally. Are we understood? Bronson looked around the saloon, as if hoping for support from other patrons, but everyone was suddenly very interested in their drinks. He was trapped, and he knew it. To back down would be humiliating, but to continue the confrontation could be fatal. We ain't finished, Bronson muttered, but he was already backing toward the door. Oh, but we are, Thomas said pleasantly. Unless you'd like to finish it right now. Bronson's hand moved toward his gun, but something in Thomas's eyes made him reconsider. He had survived this long by knowing when he was outmatched, and every instinct he possessed was screaming danger. Without another word, he turned and stalked out of the saloon, leaving the batwing doors swinging behind him. Thomas settled back into his chair and picked up his coffee cup as if nothing had happened. I apologize for the interruption, he said to Sarah May. This coffee is excellent, by the way. Sarah May stared at him, her mind reeling from what had just transpired. In less than 5 minutes, this stranger had faced down the most feared man in Cedar Ridge and made it look effortless. Who are you? She asked. Just a man passing through, Thomas replied, though it seems I may be staying longer than originally planned. Why? Sarah May asked. Why did you do that? Thomas looked at her with those intelligent eyes, and for a moment, Sarah May felt as if he could see right through her. Because no one should have to live in fear, he said simply, and because sometimes good people need someone to stand up for them. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through town, and the Silver Dollar was busier than usual as people came by to see the stranger who had faced down Jake Bronson. Thomas remained at his corner table, drinking coffee and observing everything with quiet attention. Sarah May found herself stealing glances at him throughout the day. There was something about him that was different from any man she had ever met. He treated her with a respect that she wasn't accustomed to, speaking to her as if her thoughts and opinions mattered. When she brought him fresh coffee, he thanked her as if she had done him a great favor rather than simply performing her job. As the afternoon wore on, more of Bronson's gang began filtering into the saloon. They didn't approach Thomas directly, but Sarah May could feel their hostile stares and hear their muttered conversations. They were planning something, and she was terrified that Thomas would pay the price for defending her. You should leave, she whispered to him during one of her trips to his table. "They're going to try to hurt you." Thomas smiled, but there was steel beneath the warmth. "Let them try," he said. "I didn't come this far to run from bullies." "But you don't understand," Sarah May insisted. "There are more of them, and they don't fight fair." "Neither do I," Thomas replied, and something in his tone made Sarah May believe that Jake Bronson had badly underestimated his opponent. As evening approached, and the saloon filled with its usual crowd of cowboys and drifters, the tension in the air became almost palpable. Bronson himself hadn't returned, but his men were there, watching and waiting. Sarah May moved through her duties with growing anxiety, knowing that the confrontation was far from over. Thomas seemed unconcerned by the hostile attention. He had moved to the bar where he could keep his back to the wall and watch the entire room. He made casual conversation with other patrons, and Sarah May was amazed to see how easily he fit in. Despite his expensive clothes and obvious education, he could talk cattle and horses with the best of them, and his knowledge of the territory was impressive. It was just after sunset when Jake Bronson finally returned, and he wasn't alone. He had brought 6 men with him, all armed and all looking for trouble. They spread out around the saloon, blocking the exits and creating an atmosphere of menace that had the other patrons nervously finishing their drinks and heading for the door. "Well," Bronson called out, his voice loud enough to be heard over the piano music. "If it ain't the famous Thomas Whitmore." "Still here, I see." Thomas turned slowly, his hand resting casually on the bar. "Mr. Bronson, I was beginning to think you'd decided to be sensible." "The only sensible thing," Bronson snarled, "is for you to get out of my town and take your fancy clothes with you." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Thomas replied. "I've grown rather fond of the local hospitality." The saloon had gone quiet except for the nervous shuffling of feet and the creak of floorboards. Sarah May pressed herself against the wall behind the bar, her heart pounding as she watched the 2 men face each other. Pete had disappeared into the back room, leaving her alone to witness whatever was about to unfold. "Last chance," Bronson said, his hand hovering near his gun. "Walk away now, or we'll carry you out." Thomas straightened up, and for the first time all day, his calm facade slipped slightly. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable authority of a man born to command. "Mr. Bronson, I've been patient with you because I hoped you might see reason. But since subtlety appears to be wasted on you, let me be direct." He stepped away from the bar, and Sarah May noticed that several of Bronson's men had begun to look nervous. There was something about Thomas's bearing that suggested they had badly miscalculated. "My full name is Thomas Jefferson Whitmore III," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "My grandfather fought with Sam Houston at San Jacinto. My father built the largest cattle empire west of the Mississippi, and I have personally hanged more rustlers and outlaws than you can count." He began walking toward Bronson, his movements deliberate and confident. "Now, you have a choice to make. You can apologize to the lady, finish your drink, and leave this establishment quietly. Or you could draw that gun and find out why my family has survived in this territory while better men than you have ended up in unmarked graves." Bronson's confidence was clearly shaken, but he was trapped by his own reputation. To back down now would destroy his credibility completely. "You talk big for 1 man against 7, he said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. 7. Thomas looked around the room with apparent surprise. "I only count 6 cowards and 1 fool." That did it. Bronson's face contorted with rage, and his hand dropped toward his gun. But before he could clear leather, Thomas had drawn and fired in one smooth motion. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space, and Bronson's gun went flying from his hand as he screamed and clutched his wrist. The other men started to reach for their weapons, but Thomas had already shifted his aim. "I wouldn't," he said conversationally. "The next man who moves gets a bullet in the chest instead of the hand." Bronson was on his knees, cradling his shattered wrist and moaning. Thomas walked over and picked up the fallen gun, examining it with professional interest. Cold point 45, he mused. Good weapon, but poorly maintained. A man's gun says a lot about his character. He looked down at Bronson with something approaching pity. You're lucky I'm in a charitable mood. 20 years ago, I would have put that bullet through your heart. You shot me. Bronson gasped, as if he couldn't believe it. I winged you, Thomas corrected. If I had shot you, you'd be dead. Now, I believe you owe the lady an apology. Bronson looked up at Sarah May with hatred burning in his eyes, but, faced with Thomas's unwavering gun, he had no choice. Sorry, he mumbled. That's not much of an apology, Thomas observed. Try again. I'm sorry, Miss Sarah May, Bronson said through gritted teeth. I won't bother you again. See that you don't, Thomas replied. Because next time, I won't be so generous. The confrontation was over almost before it had begun. Bronson's men helped their wounded leader to his feet and half-carried him from the saloon, leaving blood drops on the floor as evidence of their humiliation. The other patrons began to filter back in, their excited conversations filling the air as they discussed what they had just witnessed. Sarah May stood frozen behind the bar, unable to believe what had just happened. In all her life, no one had ever stood up for her the way Thomas had just done. She watched as he calmly reloaded his gun and returned it to its holster, his movements efficient and practiced. Are you all right? He asked, approaching the bar with concern in his eyes. Sarah May nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here. Nothing good, Thomas admitted. But you don't have to worry about that now. But what about tomorrow? Sarah May asked. What about when you leave town? He'll come back, and he'll be angrier than ever. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah May could see him thinking. Finally, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What if I told you that you didn't have to stay here? That there were other options? What do you mean? I mean that sometimes the only way to solve a problem is to remove yourself from it entirely. Have you ever thought about leaving Cedar Ridge? Sarah May laughed, but there was no humor in it. Where would I go? This is all I know, and I don't have any money. Money can be arranged, Thomas said quietly. And as for where to go, well, that depends on what you want to do with your life. Before Sarah May could respond, Pete emerged from the back room, his face pale and his hands shaking. Is it over? He asked nervously. For now, Thomas replied. But I think it would be wise to make some changes around here. Perhaps hire some security, or at least make it clear that harassment of your employees won't be tolerated. Pete nodded eagerly. Whatever you say, Mr. Whitmore. Whatever you say. As the evening wore on, Sarah May found herself thinking about Thomas's words. The idea of leaving Cedar Ridge had never seriously occurred to her before. It had always seemed impossible. But now, with this stranger offering her a way out, she began to imagine what a different life might look like. She thought about her old dream of becoming a teacher, about the books she had read in secret, and the lessons she had planned in her mind. She thought about waking up without fear, about working in a place where she was respected rather than merely tolerated. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. The morning after the confrontation brought an eerie quiet to Cedar Ridge. Word of Jake Bronson's humiliation had spread through town like wildfire, and people were talking in hushed whispers about the stranger who had faced down the most feared man in the territory. Sarah May arrived at the Silver Dollar before dawn, as was her custom, but everything felt different now. Thomas was already there, sitting at the same corner table with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be a collection of papers spread out before him. He looked up as she entered and offered that warm smile that had already become familiar. Good morning, Sarah May. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in months, she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. For the first time in weeks, she hadn't lain awake listening for footsteps in the alley outside her small room, hadn't jumped at every sound. I'm glad to hear it, Thomas said. I was hoping we might have a chance to talk today. About your future. Sarah May busied herself with her morning routine, wiping down tables and preparing for the day ahead. But her mind kept returning to Thomas's words from the night before. The possibility of leaving Cedar Ridge seemed both thrilling and terrifying. What did you mean last night? She asked finally, approaching his table with fresh coffee. About other options? Thomas gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit down. We have some things to discuss. Sarah May glanced around the empty saloon, then settled into the chair. It felt strange to be sitting as a customer rather than serving, and she couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked for her opinion about anything important. Tell me about your education, Thomas said, his tone serious but kind. My education? Sarah May was taken aback by the question. I can read and write, if that's what you mean. My mother taught me before she died, and I've kept up with it on my own. What do you like to read? Whatever I can get my hands on, Sarah May replied. Books are hard to come by here, but the doctor's wife sometimes lends me hers. I've read some poetry, a few novels, and I particularly enjoy the educational books about history and science. Thomas nodded approvingly. And mathematics? I can do sums and figures well enough. I keep track of the saloon's earnings and expenses for Pete, and I've never made a mistake. Excellent, Thomas said, making a note on one of his papers. What about children? Do you enjoy working with them? Sarah May's heart leaped. More than anything. I've always dreamed of becoming a teacher, but she trailed off, the old familiar sense of impossibility settling over her. But what? But dreams don't pay debts or put food on the table. Besides, what school would hire someone who works in a saloon? Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying her with those intelligent eyes. What if I told you that a good friend of mine is the superintendent of schools in San Antonio? And what if I mentioned that they're desperately in need of qualified teachers, particularly young women who aren't afraid of hard work? Sarah May stared at him in disbelief. You're not serious. I'm completely serious, Thomas replied. But there would be conditions. What kind of conditions? You would need to leave Cedar Ridge immediately. Today, in fact. Jake Bronson isn't the type of man to forget a humiliation, and while I've bought you some time, I can't stay here indefinitely to protect you. Sarah May's mind raced. Leave today? It seemed impossible, but then again, so had standing up to Jake Bronson. There's more, Thomas continued. The teaching position would require you to complete a brief training course in San Antonio. Nothing too difficult, but you would need to demonstrate proficiency in reading, writing, arithmetic, and basic science. Are you confident you could manage that? I think so, Sarah May said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't understand why you're offering this to me. You don't even know me. Thomas was quiet for a moment, and Sarah May saw something like pain flicker across his features. Let's just say I have my reasons, he said finally. Good people deserve good opportunities, and you've been dealt a poor hand through no fault of your own. Before Sarah May could respond, the batwing door swung open, and Dr. Morrison entered the saloon. He was an older man with kind eyes and graying hair, and he had always treated Sarah May with more respect than most of the town citizens. Morning, Miss Sarah May, he said, then noticed Thomas. You must be the famous Mr. Whitmore. The whole town's talking about what happened here last night. Dr. Morrison, Thomas said, rising to shake the man's hand. I was hoping I might have a word with you. Of course. What can I do for you? I'm planning to escort Miss Sarah May to San Antonio today, and I wanted to make sure there were no medical concerns that might make travel inadvisable. Dr. Morrison looked surprised, then pleased. San Antonio? Well, that's wonderful news. Sarah May is as healthy as a horse, and a change of scenery would do her a world of good. He paused. Though I have to ask, what's the rush? Surely you could wait a few days to make proper preparations. I'm afraid not, Thomas replied grimly. Jake Bronson's pride was badly wounded last night, and pride makes men do foolish things. I'd rather not give him time to rally his courage or gather reinforcements. The doctor nodded understandingly. In that case, you're wise to leave quickly. Bronson's not the forgiving type, and he has friends in some unsavory places. What about your things? Thomas asked Sarah May. Do you have belongings you need to collect? Sarah May thought about her small room above the general store. She owned so little that it could all fit in a single carpet bag. A few dresses, some undergarments, her mother's Bible, and the handful of books she had managed to acquire over the years. "It won't take long," she said. "But what about Pete? I can't just leave without telling him." "I'll handle Pete," Thomas assured her. "Why don't you go gather your things, and I'll make the necessary arrangements." As Sarah May walked through the streets of Cedar Ridge toward her room, she felt as if she was seeing the town for the first time. The buildings that had always seemed permanent and unchanging now looked small and shabby. The people she passed on the street seemed to be moving through their lives without purpose or hope. Her room was exactly as she had left it: a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a washstand. Everything she owned in the world could fit in the worn carpet bag her father had carried during his better days. As she packed her few belongings, Sarah May tried to process what was happening to her. 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been avoiding Jake Bronson's unwanted attention. Now she was preparing to leave everything she had ever known to pursue a dream she had barely dared to whisper. It felt surreal, like something out of one of the novels she had read in secret. She was folding her mother's wedding dress, the only nice thing she owned, when she heard footsteps on the stairs outside her door. For a moment, her blood froze with the old familiar fear, but then she heard Thomas's voice. "Sarah May, are you ready to go?" She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, looking somehow larger and more imposing than he had in the saloon. Behind him stood a man she didn't recognize, tall, weathered, and armed with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life in dangerous places. "This is Miguel Santos," Thomas said. "He'll be accompanying us to San Antonio." Miguel touched the brim of his hat politely. "Señorita, is everything all right?" Sarah May asked, noting the serious expressions on both men's faces. "Bronson's been asking questions around town," Thomas explained. "He's trying to find out where you live and when you'll be alone. Miguel thought it would be wise if we left sooner rather than later." Sarah May's hands trembled slightly as she closed her carpet bag. The reality of her situation was sinking in. She wasn't just leaving for a new opportunity, she was fleeing for her safety. "Don't worry," Miguel said, his accent soft but his voice reassuring. "We will see you safely to San Antonio, and from there you can begin your new life." As they made their way down the back stairs and through the alley behind the building, Sarah May caught a glimpse of the Silver Dollar Saloon. Through the window, she could see Pete talking animatedly to a group of customers, probably telling and retelling the story of the previous night's confrontation. "Will he be all right?" she asked, nodding toward the saloon. "Pete's smarter than he looks," Thomas replied. "He'll hire some security and make it clear that his establishment is under my protection. That should be enough to keep Bronson's men away." They reached the stables where 3 horses waited, 2 saddle horses, and a pack animal loaded with supplies. Thomas helped Sarah May mount the smaller horse while Miguel checked the cinches and gear with practiced efficiency. "Have you ever ridden much?" Thomas asked as he swung into his own saddle. "Some," Sarah May replied, trying to project more confidence than she felt. "My father taught me when I was younger. It's about a 3-day ride to San Antonio," Miguel explained. "We'll take our time and stick to the main roads. No need to make this harder than it has to be." As they rode out of Cedar Ridge in the early morning light, Sarah May felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She was leaving behind everything she had ever known, trusting her future to a man she had met only yesterday. It should have felt reckless and dangerous, but instead, she felt more hopeful than she had in years. The countryside rolled by in a haze of grass and scrub brush, broken occasionally by stands of oak and mesquite. Thomas and Miguel rode on either side of her, maintaining a casual conversation that nevertheless allowed them to keep watch for any signs of pursuit. "Tell me about your family," Sarah May said to Thomas during a rest stop beside a small creek. Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring out at the horizon. "My father built the Whitmore Ranch from nothing. Started with a few head of cattle and a lot of determination. By the time he died, we owned more land than some eastern states." "And your mother?" "Died when I was fever took her, along with my younger sister." There was pain in his voice, old but still sharp. "After that, it was just my father and me." He taught me everything he knew about cattle, horses, and men. Is that why you're helping me? Sarah May asked quietly. Because you lost your sister? Thomas looked at her with surprise, then something like admiration. You're very perceptive. Yes, partly. I think about what her life might have been like if she had lived, and I hope someone would have helped her if she hadn't needed it. Miguel, who had been checking the horses, rejoined their conversation. Thomas is too modest. He has helped many people over the years. There's a school for orphan children that he built near Austin, and a hospital in San Antonio that bears his family's name. Why? Sarah May asked. You could live comfortably without worrying about other people's problems. My father always said that wealth without purpose is just accumulated guilt, Thomas replied. A man has to do something meaningful with his life, or what's the point? As they continued their journey, Sarah May found herself opening up to these two men in ways she never had with anyone else. She told them about her childhood, about her dreams of becoming a teacher, about the loneliness and fear that had dominated her life in Cedar Ridge. Thomas, in turn, shared stories of his travels throughout the territory. He had been to California during the gold rush, had fought in several range wars, and had even spent time in Washington, D.C. working with territorial legislators. Miguel had similar tales of adventure, having served as a scout for the Army before going to work for the Whitmore family. How long have you worked for Thomas? Sarah May asked Miguel during their second day of travel. 15 years, Miguel replied. Since I was not much older than you are now. Thomas saved my life, and I've been proud to serve his family ever since. Save your life. Miguel glanced at Thomas, who nodded slightly. I was accused of stealing cattle that I did not steal. The real thieves had planted evidence to make it look like I was guilty. I was about to be hanged when Thomas arrived and proved my innocence. How did he do that? He tracked down the real thieves and brought them back to face justice, Miguel said simply. It took him 3 weeks, but he never gave up. Sarah May looked at Thomas with new understanding. This was a man who didn't just talk about justice. He acted on it, even when it was difficult or dangerous. On their final night, before reaching San Antonio, they made camp beside a small stream surrounded by cottonwood trees. Miguel prepared a simple but delicious meal of beans, bacon, and coffee, while Thomas tended to the horses. Sarah May found herself helping with small tasks, enjoying the simple pleasure of useful work. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Thomas asked as they sat around the campfire. Terrified, Sarah May admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't pass the teacher training? You'll be fine, Thomas assured her. You're intelligent, hardworking, and you have a genuine desire to help children learn. Those are the most important qualifications. And if I fail, then we'll find something else, Thomas said simply. There are many ways to build a meaningful life, Sarah May. Teaching is just one of them. That night, as Sarah May lay in her bedroll looking up at the stars, she thought about the incredible changes in her life. A week ago, her greatest ambition had been to survive another day without incident. Now she was about to begin training for a profession she had only dreamed of. She thought about Jake Bronson and wondered if he was still looking for her. The idea should have frightened her, but somehow it didn't. For the first time in her life, she had protectors, not just Thomas and Miguel, but the entire weight of the Whitmore family's influence and resources. The next morning, they crested a hill and saw San Antonio spread out before them. It was larger than Sarah May had imagined, with real streets and brick buildings and more people than she had ever seen in one place. Welcome to your new life, Thomas said, and Sarah May heard the satisfaction in his voice. As they rode into the city, Sarah May noticed how people responded to Thomas. Shopkeepers came out to greet him, children waved from doorways, and even the local sheriff tipped his hat respectfully. This was clearly a man who commanded respect throughout the territory. They stopped first at a modest hotel near the center of town. You'll stay here while you complete your training, Thomas explained. The room is paid for, and you'll receive a small allowance for meals and necessities. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah May said, overwhelmed by his generosity. Become the best teacher you can be, Thomas replied. That's thanks enough. The hotel was nicer than any place Sarah May had ever stayed. Her room had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with hot water, and a window that looked out onto the busy street below. It seemed impossibly luxurious after her tiny room above the general store in Cedar Ridge. That afternoon, Thomas took her to meet James Patterson, the superintendent of schools. Patterson was a scholarly man in his 50s with kind eyes and an easy manner. He interviewed Sarah May for nearly an hour, testing her reading and arithmetic skills and discussing her thoughts on education. "Most impressive," he said finally. "Thomas told me you were bright, but I must admit I'm surprised by your level of preparation. Where did you acquire such a thorough grounding in literature and mathematics?" "I've always loved learning," Sarah May replied. "I read everything I could find and practiced my sums whenever I had the opportunity." "Well, you'll fit right in with our teacher training program. It begins next Monday and runs for 6 weeks. At the end of that time, assuming you complete the requirements successfully, we have a position waiting for you at our newest school." As they walked back to the hotel, Sarah May felt as if she was floating. Everything was happening so quickly that it seemed like a dream. "There's one more thing," Thomas said as they reached the hotel lobby. "I'll be staying in San Antonio for a few more days to handle some business matters. If you need anything or if anyone gives you trouble, send word to me immediately." "You've already done so much," Sarah May protested. "And I want to make sure it all works out," Thomas replied firmly. "You're under my protection, Sarah May, and that means something in this territory." That evening, alone in her hotel room, Sarah May sat by the window and watched the people of San Antonio go about their lives. She thought about the path that had brought her here, from a desperate saloon girl facing an uncertain future to a prospective teacher with real hope for the first time in years. It all seemed impossible, but here she was. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for a career she had only dared to dream about. And somewhere in the distance, Jake Bronson and Cedar Ridge were becoming nothing more than unpleasant memories. For the first time since her father's death, Sarah May allowed herself to believe that her life might actually turn out well. And as she prepared for bed in her comfortable hotel room, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the wealthy cowboy who had warned a bully to lay off and had changed her life forever. 6 months had passed since Sarah May Bennett left Cedar Ridge, and the transformation in her life was so complete that sometimes she had trouble believing it was real. She stood before her classroom in the new San Antonio Elementary School, watching 32 eager faces as she explained the day's arithmetic lesson. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the neat rows of desks and the carefully organized books that lined the walls. "Now, if Johnny has 12 apples and gives away 4 to his friends, how many does he have left?" she asked, and a forest of hands shot up in response. Teaching had proven to be everything she had dreamed, and more. The children adored her gentle but firm manner, and their parents appreciated her dedication to their education. Sarah May had thrown herself into the work with a passion that surprised even her, staying late to prepare lessons and arriving early to help struggling students. The teacher training program had been challenging but rewarding. She had studied pedagogy, child psychology, and advanced mathematics under the guidance of experienced educators who seemed genuinely excited to have such an enthusiastic student. Her natural intelligence, combined with her determination to succeed, had made her one of the most promising teachers in the program. James Patterson had been right about the need for qualified teachers. San Antonio was growing rapidly, and new schools were being built to accommodate the influx of families drawn by the expanding cattle industry and railroad development. Sarah May's school was one of 3 that had opened in the past year, and she took pride in knowing that she was helping to build something important. The children came from diverse backgrounds, the sons and daughters of ranchers, merchants, craftsmen, and laborers. Many spoke Spanish at home and were learning English as their second language, which presented unique challenges that Sarah May had learned to navigate with patience and creativity. She had even begun learning Spanish herself, practicing with her students, and their families. Very good, Maria, she said as a young girl correctly solved the arithmetic problem. Can you explain to the class how you arrived at that answer? As the morning progressed, Sarah May found her thoughts drifting to Thomas Whitmore. He had remained in San Antonio for 2 weeks after her arrival, checking on her progress and ensuring that she was settling in well. Then, he had departed for his ranch, promising to return when his business allowed. She had received 3 letters from him over the past 6 months, brief, friendly notes that asked about her work and assured her of his continued support. The letters were proper and respectful, but Sarah May had detected a warmth in them that made her heart skip whenever she saw his distinctive handwriting. She tried not to read too much into his correspondence. Thomas Whitmore was a wealthy and influential man who could have his choice of any woman in the territory. It was natural that he would check on someone he had helped, but that didn't mean his interest was anything more than charitable concern. Still, she couldn't help but remember the way he had looked at her during those intense days of their journey to San Antonio. There had been something in his eyes that went beyond mere kindness, and the memory of it continued to warm her during lonely evenings in her small apartment near the school. Miss Bennett. Sarah May looked up to see little Timothy Walsh holding up his slate with a confused expression. She had been wool gathering again, something that seemed to happen more frequently when she thought about Thomas. Yes, Timothy. I can't make this sum come out right. Could you help me? Sarah May moved to his desk and gently guided him through the problem, enjoying the moment when understanding dawned in his young eyes. This was what she loved most about teaching, watching children discover their own capabilities and gain confidence in their abilities. The school day ended at 3 o'clock, and Sarah May spent another hour helping several students who were struggling with their lessons. By the time she had cleaned the blackboard and organized her materials for the next day, the sun was beginning to set, and the building had grown quiet. She was gathering her things when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her classroom. The janitor usually didn't come around until much later, and most of the other teachers had left hours ago. Sarah May felt a familiar flutter of nervousness, old habit from her days in Cedar Ridge that she still couldn't completely shake. Miss Bennett. The voice that called her name made her heart leap. She turned to see Thomas Whitmore standing in her classroom doorway, looking exactly as handsome and confident as she remembered. He was dressed in his usual fine clothes, but there was dust on his boots and weariness in his eyes that suggested he had traveled hard to get here. Thomas, she exclaimed, then caught herself. I mean, Mr. Whitmore. What a wonderful surprise. Hello, Sarah May, he said, and that warm smile transformed his entire face. I hope you don't mind me dropping in unannounced. I was in town on business, and thought I'd see how you were getting along. Of course I don't mind, Sarah May replied, suddenly conscious of her simple teaching dress and the chalk dust on her hands. Please come in. Thomas stepped into the classroom and looked around with obvious interest. He examined the children's work displayed on the walls, the neat arrangements of books and supplies, and the carefully written lesson plans visible on Sarah May's desk. This is impressive, he said finally. James Patterson told me you were doing excellent work, but seeing it firsthand is even better. The children are wonderful, Sarah May said, pride evident in her voice. They're so eager to learn, and they work so hard. I feel blessed to be here. And they're blessed to have you, Thomas replied. I can see the care you've put into everything. They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say next. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts and feelings that neither seemed ready to address directly. How long are you in town? Sarah May asked finally. A few days, Thomas replied. I was hoping we might have dinner together if you're free. I'd like to hear more about your work, and I have some news from Cedar Ridge that might interest you. Sarah May's pulse quickened. Dinner will be lovely. And, yes, I'm very curious about Cedar Ridge. Is everyone well? Most everyone, Thomas said, but his expression grew serious. We'll talk about it over dinner. Are you free this evening? Yes, of course. Excellent. I'll call for you at 7, if that suits you. After Thomas left, Sarah May found herself in a state of nervous excitement. She hurried back to her small apartment and spent an hour trying to decide what to wear. Her wardrobe was limited but respectable. She had used part of her teacher's salary to purchase several appropriate dresses for her new position. She finally settled on a deep blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and she spent extra time arranging her hair in a style she hoped looked both professional and feminine. As 7 o'clock approached, she found herself pacing her small sitting room and checking her appearance in the mirror every few minutes. Thomas arrived precisely on time, driving a handsome buggy that he handled with the same easy confidence he displayed in everything else. He helped her up to the seat beside him, and Sarah May was acutely aware of his strong hands and the clean, masculine scent of soap and leather that surrounded him. "I thought we'd go to the Continental Hotel," he said as they drove through the evening streets of San Antonio. "They have an excellent dining room, and it's quiet enough for conversation." The Continental Hotel was the finest establishment in the city, and Sarah May felt slightly intimidated as they entered the elegant dining room. But Thomas seemed completely at ease, and the maitre d'hotel greeted him by name and escorted them to a private table by a window overlooking the courtyard. "You're very well known here," Sarah May observed as they settled into their seats. "The Whitmore family has been coming to San Antonio for business for many years," Thomas explained. "My father made it a point to maintain good relationships in every major town in the territory." They ordered their dinner and wine, and for the first hour they talked about safe topics: Sarah May's teaching experiences, Thomas's ranch operations, and the rapid growth of San Antonio. But as the evening progressed and they both relaxed, their conversation became more personal. "You mentioned news from Cedar Ridge," Sarah May said during a lull in their discussion. Thomas's expression grew serious. "Jake Bronson is dead." Sarah May felt the blood drain from her face. "Dead? How?" "He tried to rob a stagecoach about 3 months ago." The passengers included a retired cavalry officer who didn't take kindly to being threatened. "Bronson drew on him and lost, and his men scattered to the winds. Without Bronson's leadership, the gang fell apart. Some of them left the territory entirely, and the others are trying to make honest livings. Pete sends his regards, by the way. Business at the Silver Dollar has improved considerably since you left." Sarah May absorbed this news in silence. She had spent so many months living in fear of Jake Bronson that it was hard to believe he was truly gone. A part of her felt relieved, but another part felt oddly empty, as if she had been carrying a weight for so long that she didn't know how to stand straight without it. "How do you feel about it?" Thomas asked gently. "I'm not sure," Sarah May admitted. "I suppose I should be happy, but mostly I just feel strange. Like a chapter of my life has finally closed." That's understandable. Fear can become a habit, even when the thing we're afraid of is no longer a threat. They finished their dinner in comfortable conversation, and as Thomas drove her home through the quiet streets, Sarah May found herself wishing the evening didn't have to end. For the first time since coming to San Antonio, she felt truly at ease with another adult. Not as a teacher with parents or administrators, but as a woman with a man who seemed to genuinely enjoy her company. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said as they reached her apartment building. "The pleasure was entirely mine," Thomas replied, helping her down from the buggy. "Sarah May, I was wondering, would you be free tomorrow evening as well? There's a concert at the Majestic Theater that I thought you might enjoy." Sarah May's heart leaped, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "I would like that very much." "Excellent. I'll call for you at 7:30. The next evening's concert was a revelation for Sarah May. She had never heard professional musicians before, and the beauty of the music moved her to tears. Thomas seemed to understand her emotional response and said nothing during the performance, simply offering her his handkerchief when she needed it. Afterward, as they walked slowly back to his buggy, Sarah May found the courage to ask the question that had been troubling her. "Thomas, why are you being so kind to me? I mean, you've already done more than enough by helping me get the teaching position. You don't owe me anything more." Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. in the gaslight from the street lamps. His expression was serious but gentle. "Sarah May, do you really think this is about obligation?" "I don't know what else it could be," she replied honestly. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah May could see him choosing his words carefully. "When I first saw you in that saloon, standing up to Jake Bronson despite being terrified, I was impressed by your courage. As I got to know you during our journey here, I was impressed by your intelligence and your determination to make something of yourself." He paused, and Sarah May held her breath. But somewhere along the way, impression became admiration, and admiration became something deeper. Sarah May felt her heart pounding. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Sarah May Bennett. I know that might seem presumptuous, given the difference in our circumstances, but I wanted you to know how I feel." The world seemed to stop spinning. Sarah May stared at Thomas, hardly daring to believe what she had heard. "You love me?" "I do," he said simply. "I know you may not feel the same way, and I don't want to pressure you. I just wanted to be honest about my feelings." Sarah May thought about all the lonely evenings in her apartment, all the time she had reread his letters and wondered what he was thinking. She thought about the way her heart had leaped when she saw him in her classroom, and the way she felt completely herself when she was with him. "Thomas," she said softly, "I love you too. I have for months, but I was afraid to admit it even to myself." The smile that spread across Thomas's face was like the sunrise. Without another word, he stepped closer and gently took her face in his hands. When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of all the feelings they had both been holding back. When they finally broke apart, Sarah May felt dizzy with happiness. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Thomas said, still holding her close, "we figure out how to build a life together." Over the following days, Thomas extended his stay in San Antonio, and they spent every free moment together. He showed her parts of the city she had never seen, introduced her to friends and business associates, and shared stories of his dreams for the future. They talked about practical matters too, where they would live, how they would manage their different backgrounds, what their life together might look like. Thomas made it clear that he had no intention of asking her to give up teaching if that wasn't what she wanted. "There are schools near the ranch," he told her as they sat in the hotel's garden one evening. "And if there aren't enough, we can build more. Good teachers are always needed." "You would do that?" "Sarah May, I want you to be happy. If teaching makes you happy, then I want to support that in every way I can." It was then that Sarah May truly understood the kind of man Thomas was. He wasn't just offering her security or protection. He was offering her partnership and respect. He valued her mind and her dreams as much as he claimed to love her. "There's something I need to tell you," Sarah May said, taking his hand in hers. "I never thought I would have the courage to love anyone completely. After everything that happened in Cedar Ridge, I thought I was too damaged, too afraid. And now I realize that the right person doesn't just make you feel safe, they make you feel brave." Thomas squeezed her hand gently. "You've always been brave, Sarah May. You just needed someone to remind you." 3 weeks later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the Episcopal Church in San Antonio. James Patterson walked Sarah May down the aisle, and Miguel Santos served as Thomas's best man. The congregation was small but warm, filled with Sarah May's fellow teachers and some of the families whose children she taught. After the ceremony, as they stood outside the church accepting congratulations, Sarah May caught sight of her reflection in the window of a nearby shop. The woman looking back at her was transformed, not just by the white dress or the flowers in her hair, but by the confidence and joy that radiated from her face. "Any regrets?" Thomas asked, following her gaze. "Only one," Sarah May replied, and Thomas's expression grew concerned. "What's that?" Sarah May smiled and reached up to touch his face. "I regret that it took Jake Bronson threatening me to bring us together. I wish we could have met under happier circumstances." Thomas laughed and pulled her close. "I don't care how we met, as long as we did." As they rode away from the church in a flower-decorated buggy, heading toward their new life together, Sarah May thought about the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a frightened young woman trapped in a life that offered no hope for the future. Today, she was beginning a new chapter as the wife of a man she loved and respected, with a career that fulfilled her and dreams that no longer seemed impossible. The road to the Whitmore Ranch stretched out before them, winding through rolling hills covered with wildflowers. In the distance, Sarah May could see the mountains that marked the edge of their new home territory. It was beautiful country, full of possibility and promise. "Are you ready for this?" Thomas asked as they crested a hill, and the ranch buildings came into view. Sarah May looked at the sprawling complex of barns, corrals, and outbuildings, at the comfortable ranch house that would be their home, and at the vast expanse of land that stretched to the horizon. She thought about the children she would teach in the local school, the friends she would make among the ranch families, and the life she and Thomas would build together. "I'm ready," she said, and meant it completely. As their buggy rolled down the hill toward home, Sarah May reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. She had started as an innocent saloon maiden facing an uncertain future, had been rescued by a wealthy cowboy who warned her tormentor to lay off, and had ended up as a respected teacher and beloved wife. It seemed like something out of a fairy tale, but it was real. It was her life. And as Thomas reached over to take her hand and smiled at her with all the love and promise in the world, Sarah May knew that the best parts of her story were still to come. The wagon wheels rolled steadily forward, carrying them toward their future together, while behind them the dust settled and the past faded into memory. Sarah May had found her happy ending, but more than that, she had found her new beginning.